On this episode, I talk Top Gun talk with a real-life Top Gun, except he flew helicopters. His name is Jason. He's from Ohio via a plane from Vietnam. His parents left when he was only 6 months old. All he knew at that time was Ohio. His parents knew pain, struggle, suffering. They're grateful to have been relocated to the United States. And Jason feels grateful for the opportunities living here has provided. And I am grateful for his service as a pilot in the military. We also talk about if you aspire to be a custom gun maker, it's important to know the science, but don't forget to be an artist. Let's jump in. Everybody, welcome to a Mildly Good podcast. I'm excited for my guest tonight. But before we get to him, let's just start off with our regular old shout outs. Above Average Joe Media does all my pictures and all that kind of cool stuff. My guy, Jason, you can find him on Instagram at Wish Pocket. He's my sound guy. So the reason everything sounds so good when you hear the podcast is because of him. My guy, Jaron, he's in North Carolina. Support local North Carolina artists. By going to his Instagram, it's No Names Originals, and he has like custom art and clothing he does on there. I wear stuff on the podcast, so look at that. And then last but not least, my guy Mo, he has the Go Bubble app, and if you use the code Go Moderately, you get a percentage off. Still, at weeks, I have not established like what that percentage is, but we won't worry about it right now. And if you're watching us now on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button. That helps me out a lot. Or if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcast, just follow. Bing, follow. So I'm just going to go ahead and introduce my guy. Everybody, this is Jason. Jason, say hi to everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, everybody. So, my man, Jason, you're one of the lucky few here at the beginning of people I don't know to come on the podcast. So I'm so excited to have you here. So let's just kind of start off with kind of what you used to do, and you can just do like a 2-minute overview, and then what you do now.
Okay. My name's Jason. I am a retired Army helicopter pilot.
How many years?
Total of 20 years in the service. Mm-hmm. It was split up between, let me make sure I get this right, going back into the Stone Age here for me. 6 years in the Navy as an enlisted person. Uh-huh. I had a break in service for about 4.5, 5 years or so, and then started researching how to become an aviator in the military. I wanted to be a military pilot still, and found out about the program that I ultimately joined up for. Got accepted to that program, and then 9/11 happened. And then pretty much took my career from that point on until I retired in 2016 out of Fort Hood, Texas, here in Texas. And since then started my own company doing stuff in the firearms industry. And we can get into
more from there. We'll get into that. So, okay, you were in the Navy for 6 years?
Yes.
Right? And then when you rejoined the military, what branch did you join?
I joined the Army.
Okay. Was there any conflict with the guys, like when you joined, where they look down on you because you were in the Navy before? They give you kind of shit about it?
Oh, yeah. There's the typical, in-branch rivalry type, stuff. So it's profanity. Is that it?
Oh, yeah, you're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I got a little bit of shit about it.
Yeah.
Calling me squid and squabby seaman and all that kind of stuff. But as the program in which I do, I don't know if you want to go right into it at this point.
Ahead.
So let me kind of take a step back. After my enlistment and then joined the Navy, after watching Top Gun back in '84 too many times, probably growing up.
Okay, were the guys in Top Gun, were they in the Navy?
Yes, those were naval aviators in Top Gun originally.
Oh my God! You know how many years old I was when I mean, it makes sense because they were taking off on ships and things like that, right? But I guess I don't know. I just always assumed it was the Air Force.
Top Gun was like one of the biggest recruiting tools for the Navy at that time, and then obviously now, what is it? 30 years later. Maverick just came out, which is the sequel to that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's going to be the next.
Well, I don't understand why they
tool.
didn't go to the well sooner. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I mean, like they should be on like I don't know, like the Maverick's kids or something like
sure,
that. You know?
Right.
You know? Anyway, so you're in the Navy 6 years, and then you go to join the Army.
Yeah. Well, I got out of the Navy after doing 3 deployments on carriers, going to the Middle East after after Gulf War One. I was like, yeah, going on 6-month deployments after every other year for 6 months at a time on a ship is terrible. I think I'm going to get out and do my own thing. So I went to work at a few civilian jobs after that. I was an avionics technician. That was my field in the Navy. And then one of my jobs after getting out of the Navy was working at a subcontractor for NASA up at John Glenn Research Center, co-located with Cleveland Airport.
When you were in the Navy, did you get like your education? Did college?
No, I was actually just enlisted, so I didn't have a degree at that time. One of the main reasons for joining the Navy at 17 when I graduated high school was I wasn't really ready for college yet. I didn't kind of different culture a little bit, and we can get into that a little bit more here in a second. But I wasn't ready for college. I'd done 12 years of school, graduated from high school, and I was like, all right, I'm just going to go join the military and kind of see where my career path goes.
Do you have any other family members in the military?
No. Well, my dad was in the service back then, but I didn't know about it at that time.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So we can get into that here.
Keep going.
So kind of, I don't know if chronologically might make more sense here. So one of the jobs I worked at, like I said, was NASA. It's subcontractor for NASA at Glenn Research Center in Cleveland, Ohio. And was a troubleshooting technician. I was on call most of the time. So I'm there surfing the internet, which was relatively new still at that time.
What year is that?
This would be late 90s. So 90.
Oh, yeah.
97.
We don't even have cell phones at that point.
Right. Yeah. So I was taking advantage of having the internet,
right. Free internet.
Right.
It's way more exciting than it is now. Yeah.
Rather than having the dial-up at home that I had, the AOL, sure. You got mail, So anyway, just happened to get on astronaut biographies because that's what you do at NASA, and found out that at that time, 8 out of the 12 Army astronauts in the space program started out as warrant officers. And I didn't know what that was. Well, I knew what warrant officers were, but I didn't know that was an aviation field that coming from the Navy at that time. The Army is the only branch of service, well, at that time, that had flying warrant officers.
Okay.
So most of the warrant officers in the Army were established the warrant officers go back have a pretty long lineage, but mainly they were used in Vietnam.
Really quickly.
Yes.
What's a warrant officer?
Okay. So a warrant officer is essentially a limited duty officer.
Okay.
As opposed to your regular typical officers, lieutenant, captain, major, light colonel, and so on and so forth. These are chief warrant officer W01 to Chief Warrant Officer 5.
Okay.
And it's a middle section of officers that are above senior enlisted. So they're above all of the enlisted ranks, and they are considered officers. So we get saluted. We are commissioned after CW2. Chief Warrant Officer 2, you get a full commission by the Secretary of the Army. I believe I should know that. Anyway, but we're below like the lowest lieutenant. So, but we're specialty officers, and the way the Army uses them is essentially cheap labor as aviators most of the time. And there is ground warrant officers also, or other branch warrant officers like special forces and so on and so forth. So they're special technical tactical experts in their field of work.
Okay.
So as me being an aviation warrant officer, when I found out about these 8 astronauts in the space program at that time that started as warrant officers and progressed to be astronauts, I was like, oh, let me research that. And then realized that I was still young enough to participate in that program. So I submitted an application. This would have been early 2000s at this point. So there's kind of a long process of getting your application in, doing physicals, medical physicals, and for aviation and that kind of stuff. And I found out I was accepted on August of 2001.
Oh, wow.
And then September 2001 happened, and I was like, oh crap. What did I just sign up for? I thought it was going to be cool. I could be like Maverick and all that kind of stuff. And now we were getting ready to go to war.
Yeah.
So
Really quickly, where were
Yes.
you when 9/11 happened?
I was in Cleveland, Ohio, or in the suburbs outside of Cleveland, Ohio.
Like, did you work that day? Like, what were you doing like that day?
I
Do you
was on
remember?
swing shift at that time.
Mhm.
And my office is co-located with the Cleveland Hopkins Airport
Mhm.
on the on the NASA side of the airport. They share the same runway. So I got a call. I was actually still sleeping at that time at 9 o'clock in the morning because I was on swing shift. So I had gotten a call that morning from guys at work who were on the morning shift, and they said, "Hey, stay by your phone. We may be closing down the facility today. Turn on the news." And not knowing what I was groggy and all that stuff, got up and I actually had a buddy, former Navy buddy, sleeping on the couch. Well, he was a reservist with on one of the SEAL teams at that time as a support guy.
Oh wow!
So he had brought a lot of gear with him. So he's either coming from a training evolution or getting ready to go to a training evolution. He just happened to fly in and spend that weekend or long weekend with me. So he was actually downstairs on my couch sleeping, and I turned on the news and I was like, holy crap, we're being attacked. The country's being attacked. And anyway, long story short, not realizing at that time, specifically at that time, Flight 93 was still in the air and was in direct control with Cleveland Center, the one that crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
So it was circling somewhere above the Cleveland, Pennsylvania, or Northeast Ohio and Pennsylvania at that time. They were still in the airspace over Cleveland. So they didn't know what was going on. So they locked down all air traffic across the entire country at that time.
Right.
But Cleveland, immediately I got the call, maybe about 30 minutes later, said, hey, they're closing down everything. Airports are closed. The NASA facility is going to be closed. Don't come to work today. And then we're going to go from there. So obviously, just like everybody else, glued to the TV for the next 48 hours until you couldn't stand seeing the imagery anymore. And, trying to figure out what the next steps for the country was. But it was a time that was very rejuvenating for the country in some respects, because it collectively as a nation, we all became one again. Yeah. And that's something that we've definitely lost today, getting into, modern, if we want to dabble into modern politics, I hate to use that as
but it is amazing how tragedy brings people together.
Absolutely.
Just in general in life, right? Like, a parent dying or whatever else it is, like, you'll have a brother or sister you haven't talked to in years because his parent died. So tragedy has that way of drawing people in. Even like, when you're driving down the road, and you look over and you're like, oh, there's an accident. Everybody's rubbernecking to the other side. Anyways, you said something a while ago that I wanted to touch on. Okay. Did you say that warrant officers were used, the first time they were used was in the Vietnam War? Is that what you said?
No, not. There's warrant officers that go all the way back to World War II and further. But the main thing that warrant officers were used as aviators, for the most part, was in Vietnam. That was the predominant field as Huey pilots. Right. You think about the Vietnam War, you think of all those flights of Hueys going in and dropping off guys on the ground. Those were all warrant officers for the most part. There obviously there's regular officers or commissioned full line of duty officers, unrestricted line officers that are in command, the company commanders and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. They're still your captains, majors, colonels, and so on and so forth. But they're overseeing basically company or squadron or platoon of warrant officers, and then your enlisted guys as maintainers and that kind of stuff, as mechanics and whatnot. So
okay, because I've messed this up before, not with you, with somebody else.
Yeah, no worries.
Your nationality is what?
Okay, so I am Chinese and Vietnamese.
Okay. Did any part, like, because was any part like of the Vietnam War, was there a reason why you had a little link with that, or like that, because you kind of brought up that fact?
Yes.
Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, I was actually born in Vietnam.
Okay.
I was born in Saigon, which is now Ho Chi Minh City. So a little bit of family lineage, if we want to get into that for a second here.
Before Ohio,
yeah. I'll get to Ohio. It all culminates.
It's going to be a bunch of places you don't know, and then Ohio.
Yeah,
right.
Sure, yeah. So family lineage, and I kind of think it's somewhat interesting. I like to brag about this in some respects. So going back on my father's side specifically, because I know more about that than my mom's side. So family originally, like great-grandfather originally came from Hainan Island. which is the little island that creates the Gulf of Tonkin.
Okay.
So if anybody's familiar with how the Vietnam War started with the Gulf of Tonkin incident, the island of Hainan, which is considered southern China, is what makes the peninsula of Tonkin, the Gulf of Tonkin, which is North Vietnam. Vietnam's kind of an S-shaped coastal country, and the island of Hainan sits right off the coast of that and creates that little gulf that is the Gulf of Tonkin. So my great-grandfather had, to this day, they still have a house on Hainan Island.
No way.
And I've managed to go back and visit. Now, obviously, that's considered part of China, which is CCP, Communist China. So I had to be careful about that being active duty. So I didn't get to go back there until after I had gotten out and retired. It was actually during my break in service after I got out of the Navy initially. Yeah. So, which another interesting factoid was, I don't know if you're familiar with the incident, Hainan Island incident that happened in, I believe it was April of 2001. P3, a U.S. Navy aircraft and a Chinese fighter collided, or they were trying to deter the aircraft, and it was forced down on the island of Hainan. And they took the crew hostage for a little while. It was in the news. I don't know if you're a little younger than me, so
in 90,
people who are interested in that can look up the history of it.
In 91, I was a freshman in high school.
2000.
Sorry. Yeah. In 01, what was I doing? How old was I? At 76, math. 5 to 25? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't matter. That whole time, I didn't know my head from my asshole. So, I wasn't concerned with politics or anything else that was going on in the world. So, okay.
So, that was a huge international incident. Anyway, just signifying that was the island that my grandfather was originally from. So, getting back to the lineage here for a second, going back to World War II, actually, Japanese invade southern China, invade the island of Hainan. Most of my family fled Hainan into North Indochina, which was originally a French colony, North Vietnam.
Oh, wow.
Prior to the communists taking over. So my dad, at least, I believe, was born in Hanoi, which was North Indochina at the time, which was a French colony. Communism takes over the island, the north of Indochina from the French, becomes North Vietnam and South Vietnam. My family flees south to Saigon, where I was born. Vietnam War kicks off. North takes over the South for the most part, and the U.S. involvement obviously is maybe a little controversial. But
sure.
My father worked with the South Vietnamese Army with U.S. forces and was able to get sponsorship, get an evacuation flight during the fall of Saigon. Like, we left in spring of 75. Which is essentially when Saigon fell. Now, we weren't part of the, embassy, helicopters flying off the embassy and all that kind of stuff, but we got out on a C-130 in an organized fashion for the most part, and to a refugee camp on Guam. I was about 6 months old. It's like the cliche, my mom, my dad, my older sister, who's 1 year older than I am, and me, and a couple of handbags, leaving a country that is all they've ever known.
Yeah. And
going to Guam as refugees. And from there, we were sponsored by a church group in Middle Ohio, the Midwest in the Cleveland area. So ended up landing there. Became naturalized citizens for myself and my sister. My parents had to do the citizenship exams and all that stuff the correct way, and grew up in Ohio, Northeast Ohio. We opened up a restaurant in 1978, 79-ish. I was very young, so I don't really remember.
Vietnamese food, I'm going to assume?
Chinese, Vietnamese food, typical cultural stuff, trying to introduce culture to that part of Ohio. And graduated from that high school in Strongsville, Ohio. And then from there, picked up in the Navy and went off from there.
Okay, this is a two-part question. Are your parents still alive?
Yes.
Okay. How do they feel about growing up in Ohio, I don't say growing up because they were already adults, but being transplanted to Ohio and that experience? And then how do your parents feel about the United States? Just kind of in general, what's their general view?
Okay. They're very thankful, obviously. They considered being able to come to the U.S. as, a huge benefit to their lives. Obviously, to be able to feel safe, the story and the lineage that I basically outlined was fleeing from aggression from different
Right.
cultures, different governments, and all that kind of stuff that were persecuting their people. And so once we landed here, it was pretty much we've made it to the promised land, if you will.
Yeah.
And growing up and reverting, growing up, I never knew my dad served in the military.
So how did you not know that? Like, he just never talked about it?
He never talked about it. Yeah.
No pictures, no nothing?
Well, other than a few snapshots here and there, because remember, they didn't
just 2 bags.
They just
right?
had a couple of bags
of
clothes and whatnot. Now, since then, they've traveled back and forth and gotten pictures and some other stuff that the family still has back in Vietnam. But
he just didn't talk about it, huh?
Well, I think partially, you have to think about the timeline or the what was happening in the country at the time. So the military was very, post Vietnam. I mean, nobody wanted to be in the military at that point in time.
Right.
The military wasn't really it was kind of looked down upon culturally, and then even in Vietnam, really, the military was what you did when you couldn't do anything else. Uh-huh. Also, so it's not like the way it is, at least at that point in time in that country. It's a different culture around the stigma of military. It was almost a requirement, somewhat.
Yes,
certain countries have requirements, but if you weren't doing something more successful, then you would fall back to, kind of. But in the U.S., it's a little bit different. People take pride in the military. Obviously, the founding of this nation and learning about civics growing up and things that a lot of kids nowadays, if you ask my personal opinion on it, is they don't appreciate as much anymore. He didn't want me to. One thing he told me about was it wasn't okay. So after you finish basic training, you have a weekend where you get to spend time with your family before actually coming back and then transferring out to your future units and whatnot. So graduating from San Diego, California, from the Navy training facility there that's no longer around anymore. They've closed it down since then. We went to Disneyland or whatever, World's Land. I can't remember which one is in California.
Land.
Yes. And that's when I found out that he had served in the military.
Oh, no way.
That weekend after graduating from basic training. Because he partially, I think in his head was he didn't want me to kind of follow in his lineage because he didn't see it as a
viable lineage to follow.
Well, I think it was more the risk, somewhat of the...
I mean, you're his kid.
Right.
You don't want to lose you.
So,
you know what I mean?
So going from that, like I said, that kind of closes out the chapters of my life that involve, other than the 6 years in the Navy and then coming back to Ohio for a little while during that 4 or 5 year span where I was, before I joined back up in the service in the Army after 9/11, essentially. The big thing was so I got accepted in August of 2001. Like I said, September 11th happens, and immediately the recruiter that I went through to get accepted to the program, he's like, all right, when do you want to leave? Because they're taking everybody now.
Yeah.
Everything's a wide open door. They want to rush everybody through the training and all this kind of stuff now. And I was like, well, I know what's about to kick off. Let me have this last holiday at home. So the Christmas of 2001, I ended up staying home for. And then as 28, 29, I'm doing fuzzy math here, January of 2002, I left for basic training for the Army.
Right.
As like a 28, 29-year-old. So I'm going through basic training with all these 17, 18-year-olds at this point. And I'm 10 years older than them. And this is my second time going through a basic training. So it's a little bit, it was a different experience from the first time. First time I had no idea, you're that shock and awe of arriving at a basic training boot camp type facility. And then this time I'm seeing the psychological games they play and that kind of stuff. So it wasn't by no means that, physically I needed it and all that kind of stuff, but I knew a little bit about the games that they play in basic training to prepare you.
So I'm going to go ahead and guess that when you join the Navy, you're 17.
Yep.
Okay. But you don't know what's going on. Right. When you join the Army, you're 28, but you know what's going. You know the game. You know what they're trying to do.
Yes.
Which one was more difficult? The Army situation or like the Navy situation?
The Army physically,
Because you're older.
Because I'm older.
Right.
The Navy mentally.
Yeah.
For sure.
Was the mental stuff a lot easier at 28?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I could definitely see the different types of games.
You're just like it's a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, there's a very specific focus that they're doing in basic training, and they're breaking everybody down to the base elements, if you will.
Right. Of your mental psyche.
Of your mental psyche,
right.
of your bad habits that you've grown up living in all aspects of the United States.
Right.
Because people come from wealthy
everywhere.
Families.
Yeah.
They come from the poorest families in the country. They come from everywhere, every different lifestyle you can imagine, every different race, creed, religion, and all that stuff. And to get everybody on the same page, they break you down to the basic elements.
Yeah.
So everybody is the worst human being you could possibly be. They call you all kinds of names, at least they used to. Now, they couldn't put hands on you typically at that time. You know, in Vietnam, it's a little bit different. Everybody's seen, I'm sure, I'm brain farting. The Kubrick movie, about Private Pile and Full Metal Jacket. Everybody's seen Full Metal Jacket, and that's what they envision of basic training. I mean, it's a good representation initially, starting out, but they couldn't put hands on you physically for the most part,
right?
During my time frames. Anyway, so yeah.
Okay. I don't know. You might not want to answer this. I don't think maybe don't care.
Yeah.
Which one was harder, Navy or Army? Like just what they asked of you, not like your age and like your
mental.
About
the job itself.
Just like basic training in the Navy and basic training in the Army. Were they pretty much the same, or was like one of them harder than the other?
They were about the same in overall respect.
But it's just your age. It's just those little differences, right?
There was emphasis on different things, So the Navy was more, not saying that the Army wasn't. Don't get me wrong. They're both emphasis on attention to detail. So that's why you have to fold your clothes a specific way. That's why you have to make your bed a specific way. That's why you have to do everything that they tell you to do in the exact time they tell you, right place, right time, right uniform, all that kind of stuff. And it's to get you that sense of, if you can handle the little stuff, then the big stuff's no big deal. Mm-hmm. That's the main goal of it. But you don't realize it because you're getting yelled at from all different directions.
Right.
So it was a little bit more in that respect. The attention to detail was emphasized a whole lot more in the Navy because you're dealing with a Navy ship is what that's designed around. The training is designed around. So you're dealing with watching a gauge. You're dealing with watching, the like pressure systems and hydraulic systems and all kinds of other, things that are technically more that you need to pay attention to these specific things. Whereas the Army was a lot more emphasis on physical, obviously, because they're soldiers.
Yeah.
You're going out and running, jumping, hiking or rucking rucksacks and big heavy bags and, going through obstacle courses and all that kind of stuff. But they also had the attention to detail. It just wasn't, it was kind of like down a peg.
It totally makes sense. I've never really thought of it like that, but like you're training for the job that you're going to do.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, let me ask you this. Mm-hmm. Is that whole attention to detail and folding, is that easy for you or is that hard for you? Is that something that you naturally kind of want? Like I can be very OCD. Like I like things kind of a certain way. Sure. And so like folding clothes perfectly like sounds like right up my alley sometimes. Like so is that something that you really had to work on, or were you already kind of like that walking into the military?
I definitely wasn't excuse me. I definitely didn't have that to the level that they required or they expected of you during the Navy basic training. But by the time I got to the Army basic training, I had lived that lifestyle for 6 years.
Yeah,
and
so you were,
made habits of certain things. And obviously with the Army, it was a little bit different in some respects because there's more focus on the physical aspect of it. But there was also focus on the leadership and small unit, not tactics, that's the wrong word, organization, training to work in small teams.
Yeah.
That was the big emphasis in the Army, more so than the Navy. The Navy was everybody's in it together as one big team.
Because you're on a whole ship or something like that, right?
Right. You don't get selectively grouped into like a squad, platoon, and we're getting into rank or build up of military units. I don't want to get too deep in there, but essentially there's, basically there's like between, depending on the organization, there's 4 to 10 guys in a squad.
Right.
4 squads in a platoon, typically 3 to 4 platoons in a company, and then so on and so forth. That just keeps the groups get bigger and bigger, but you have to work down at that small level first.
Right.
And whoever's in charge, the next person in charge, what the jobs are of everybody in that small unit type thing, and going to rely on each other.
Right.
And that creates also that brotherhood that when you think about
important.
the military, that's it's a very cliche phrase in the military, but it's embracing the suck.
Mm-hmm.
It's the term that it gets thrown a lot around. Well, that embracing the suck builds those bonds that you have with people you've served with, that that you trust them with your life at that point.
I mean, you see that everywhere. You see that in sports,
sure. Absolutely.
yeah, and
exactly.
But like I would say in the military, we don't have time to sit around to see if this NBA All-Star is going to mesh with the team. Like we have shit to do. You know what I mean? And so like
absolutely.
they have to kind of fast
things
forward.
that are life and death.
Yeah,
in the
they
military,
have to kind of fast forward that whole thing. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So okay, you join the Army. How long does it take you to become what's it called again?
A warrant officer?
Yes.
Okay, so Army basic training is 9 weeks. Warrant officer candidate school is 6 weeks. So you do 9 weeks of Army basic training, then you do 6 weeks of warrant officer candidate school, which is essentially OCS, officer candidate school. If you've ever seen An Officer and a Gentleman,
mm-hmm.
that's essentially officer candidate school, kind of.
minus the women, like minus the.
Oh,
minus,
no, we had women with
okay.
at this point, everything's integrated, for the most part.
I was just meaning the officer, and I was just meaning the movie. Like,
yeah. Okay.
Like,
anyway, and then after that, you start flight school,
right?
Which is approximately, depending on, at that time, there was a lot of people getting forced through flight school,
right,
because of the war. So at that time, I started flight school probably late spring, early summer of 2002, and then finished up probably late 2004, early 2005, I think is. If
you scared of heights?
Not particularly. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's a natural apprehensiveness if I'm standing on the edge of a building,
right?
or but if I'm standing on a high bridge or something, it's not really,
So
if you feel safe, then you're safe,
So what initially, what do you initially start flying? Do you start? Okay, so you flew helicopters.
Yes.
Okay, so is that what you start at? Is flying helicopters? You start as a helicopter pilot. Absolutely.
Yeah. You start with the TH-67 Creek aircraft. It's commonly referred to as a what is it? Bell 206, excuse me. Bell 206 Jet Ranger.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, if you think about like the older 80s news choppers, that's what we started in. So it was immediately jet engine aircraft as opposed to, reciprocating diesel engines or something like that a lot of civilian flight schools start with. We don't even touch those. We start with jet engines and go from there. Not to, when I say jet engines, don't think of like Blue Thunder or Airwolf. It's not like that. It's just what's driving the big fan.
What I like about that reference is probably me and you and everyone that's kind of closer age are the only people that's going to get that reference. But those shows were so great when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I remember watching those on Friday night and just thinking they were so awesome. Anyways, go ahead. Sorry.
No worries. So you start with the TH-67 typically for primary and then instruments. And by instruments, typically during the process of the school, the way that it's set up, your order of merit is your class standing. So if you did great on tests and PT and everything, you get graded on just about everything. Now we're in a school environment, student environment, so there's a little bit of strictness to it, but it's not like basic training anymore. Mm-hmm. You have the weekends off, you have, that kind of stuff. So, but you still have to be at the right place, right time, right uniform, going through, showing up in, half day academics and then half day at the flight line or simulator, that kind of stuff. Then, so you get evaluated on your flight performance and then all your academic tests, written tests and stuff like that. So whatever your class standing is based on your pick for your type airframe. After your type airframe, now it's your type duty assignment or location of duty assignment. So if you're top of your class, you get your pick of everything. So, had some challenges, there was a couple of setbacks during my time in flight school, but ultimately I ended up fourth to pick in my class.
That's pretty good.
So yeah, not too bad. And ended up picking Blackhawks, which initially I wanted Apaches, which is a gunship. Everybody, and if anybody's seen Firebirds, that terrible movie about Army helicopters, that is what they tried to do, what the Army tried to do with Firebirds, what the Navy did with Top Gun. And it failed miserably.
What's the name of this movie?
Firebirds.
Now I want to watch it.
It's got Tommy Lee Jones, Nicolas Cage.
Oh, Nicolas Cage is in it?
Yeah, obviously. So then
I'm
now
all
you know
in
it's
now.
A winner.
Now I'm all in. Anyways.
Sean, what was the female lead's name? Anyway, not that important.
Well, I mean, you've basically shot the movie. I mean, you're like, the movie sucks, but I mean,
yeah, but the aircraft, looking at Apache, it's focused on Apaches for the most part. That movie is, and Apaches are like the gunships. Everybody's blowing stuff up and all that kind of stuff. So initially going in, I wanted to be an Apache helicopter pilot, and I probably get a lot of crap for saying this now on a podcast, but so personality traits come out in the jobs that are in the military. Okay. So diving a little deeper on that. Apache guys are like your, big beefcake, army hardcore Rambo types.
Always? I mean,
for the most part. I'm stereotyping.
We're stereotyping, but we're
personality traits.
That's the kind of guy that flies an Apache helicopter?
Yes. He wants to go and blow stuff up.
Okay.
That's the guy that puts camouflage on his face before he jumps into a loud ass helicopter to go out and fight.
Yeah.
That type of mentality. So you got that mentality. Then at that time you had 58 OH-58 Delta models, which were the helicopter with the big ball on top. Okay. They were used for observation a lot of times. Now we're talking a little bit of Cold War type technology, but they meant to hide behind a tree line and spot tanks, Russian tanks off in the distance, and then they could laze targets for the Apaches to go up and shoot. Okay. So going from there. So those guys were like your little brother. They want to be tough. They've got guns. They've got missiles and guns but they're a really small aircraft, and they're underpowered a little. By the time they added all this avionics, now this high tech stuff, they're kind of underpowered. So they're like your little brother that goes out and starts a fight and then runs back and gets their big brother to come back and finish the fight. And then you have Chinooks, which are CH-47s. Those are the twin prop rotor system aircraft, big heavy aircraft, look like a flying school bus with two palm trees on top.
Right.
Those guys are the guys that like to be comfortable. So kind of laid back, personality-wise, generally speaking. I'm going to get a lot of crap if I get this wrong. So generally speaking, they're the type of guys that want to bring the fridge and the couch and everything out into the field with them because they've got the big aircraft. They can do all of it. They can be comfortable in the field when we go out into the woods and play Army, that type of stuff. And then Blackhawks is kind of a mix of all of them. Mm-hmm. So you didn't have like a
jack of all trades kind of deal?
Not necessarily jack of all trades, but it was, everybody who, I don't want to say that didn't end up getting their primary aircraft or their first choice. There's guys who want to fly Blackhawks, of course, but it's not the race car. It's not the, heavy lift, bringing big stuff into the battlefield. And it's not the guys that are shooting everything up. It's the mix of everything. It's the air assault guys. It's the, people who does that traditional Huey role, which they bring in and all the guys drop out, mm-hmm. The platoons of people drop out and go do their thing. Let me see, right before I left for basic training for the Army, Black Hawk Down, the movie, just came out.
Oh, no way.
So everybody's familiar with that. It's the incident in Somalia of 93, where a couple of they were going in to this is special operations type people, of course. So they had their specific goal of trying to do counterterrorism and that kind of stuff. So they had a target and they went in to capture those people, those high value targets. And, initially one aircraft got shot down, and then a second aircraft got shot down. But the mission was pretty much accomplished until the aircraft got shot down. Like they already gotten the guys. They were on their way out, and one of the aircraft gets shot down, and that created an entire thing, and that essentially became the biggest firefight since Vietnam at that time, which was in 93 is when the incident happened. So, but that it was pretty prevalent, and I was like, oh my God, this is right before 9/11 now, and now Black Hawk Down just came out, and I was like, man, I don't want to fly Black Hawks, but ultimately I ended up picking Black Hawk because it was a more diverse group of people that I could relate to, I guess, at that time.
So if we're going to rank these, it would go Apache, Black Hawk, whatever the bus one is called, and then the little brother. Is that the correct order?
Are you
throwing Apache up top? You're like we're better than
No. They have their different. I'm not ranking the aircraft.
I'm ranking them.
Right. Cool factor, sure. If you want to say Apache,
that's the cool factor list.
Yeah, I suppose. Well, to people who don't do it for a living.
Yes.
It's kind of one of those things. Once you're in there and you're doing the job,
everybody works together, right?
Everybody works together for the most part. There's a little bit of rivalry type stuff, but it's part of being in a big organization that they've been training for so long to do a job, and now we actually go overseas to do it.
Right.
So, my first assignment out of flight school was Honduras, which was unexpected. I chose it, but it was a little bit different than kind of a crawl, walk, run kind of phase kind of thing, because it wasn't combat. There were already units deploying to Iraq at that time.
Guys that were in your class?
In my flight school class, sure.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there were already guys at that time that were going to units that were already downrange, is what we call it, being overseas in those combat zones. So I ended up going to Honduras, which was a multi-mission task force down there. We'll call it that. So they do a lot of humanitarian aid. They also do a lot of counter-drug operations. So primarily, the first unit I ended up showing up to was a medevac unit. I flew quite a bit down there. I made the rank structure of pilot, I guess if you want to call it that, the progression of pilot from just a regular pilot to a pilot in command, that kind of thing. So your seniority as an aviator in the military.
Are you kind of glad that it went that way? Are you glad you kind of started there? Gave you a lot of practice, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah. It was, as opposed to getting thrown right into the fire, like going down range and getting shot at immediately and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So Honduras for me was an eye-opening experience, because this is how a real unit operates now. And they're not exactly shooting at you, but you're in a foreign country.
Right.
So you do have to be careful.
They ain't happy, right?
There had been incidents up to that time for, a couple of aircraft and casualties and that kind of stuff. But that was a little bit previous, few years earlier of being down there, kind of going all the way back to like Iran-Contra and that kind of stuff with the Central American region operations type stuff. But anyway, so progressed all the way up to pilot in command in Honduras. Found out that I was coming up to my time to transfer to a new assignment. So I was talking to my detailer. That's what we call the guy who determines where you're going next and that kind of stuff. Guy who puts orders in for you. And I was like, I don't care where I go, or excuse me, I don't care where, I'm fine with deploying. I just want to go somewhere cool. So I was like, what spots do you have available? And, because, it is what it is.
Yeah.
You signed up to do the job. You're going to go downrange. There were people, not saying there were people trying to avoid it, but.
Well, it gets real.
Yeah. I mean, this is the real thing now. People are shooting at you.
Yeah. And you, probably the majority of y'all guys, there's probably a big group that maybe signed up because of 9/11, right? Mm-hmm. But there's probably a big group. There's a big group that was just like,
I'm here for college.
Yeah. They were just thought this is going to be like just a being in the military.
Sure. Right.
They weren't ready for it. So I'm sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So I got orders to Hawaii, but en route I had to go back to the schoolhouse, which is Fort Rucker, Alabama, to go through the maintenance test pilot course. So, and I was like, yeah, that's fine. I'll be a maintenance test pilot. So went back to Fort Rucker, where I just left a year and a half prior, and went through the maintenance test pilot course. That's where I met a few buddies that Andy, and then from there I went to Hawaii within, I think it was about 90 to 100, 3 months to 3.5 months or so from landing in Hawaii. I was on a plane going to Iraq.
Wow.
And this would be 05. Yeah. 05, 06 to 08, excuse me, because that's the designation of the deployment cycle. So we were OIF 06 to 08. We didn't realize that at the time. It was supposed to be 06 to 07. Mm-hmm. Typically it's a year. And we got extended within probably 3 months of arriving
being there
in Iraq.
Yeah.
Well, this was when the surge started.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember, 2005-ish is when IEDs became prevalent in Iraq. They were looking at contingency plans. I believe there was a change in command of who was in charge of the war, the big general types. And there was a reallocation of forces and focus on Iraq to complete the operation as opposed to the initial invasion. Everybody was still in that initial invasion phase, which happened pretty quickly, but now insurgency was starting, and the terrorism style of fighting. It wasn't like fighting an army anymore. It was fighting the people you don't see now. So got to Hawaii, trained up the few months that I had available there to train up. I was a pilot in command already, but so deployed overseas with the medevac unit from Hawaii. And that was my primary mission during 06 to 08 in Iraq for 15 months was medevac. So pretty graphic, pretty, hostile at that time, a lot of casualties and whatnot. You were getting at, trying to fly, what is it like to fly in a combat zone,
Right. Well, I was going to ask you, I was thinking about this and I don't want to ask you hey, what's your scariest story? But
no.
But I want to ask you, what is your, I don't want to say your best story, but maybe your favorite story, or just like your most interesting kind of memory? Because I'm sure we could just talk about just missions forever, right?
Sure. Yeah,
so what's
absolutely.
kind of something that just really stands out in your mind of a mission or something you did that's just really interesting?
Okay, so this is probably one of the more common stories I tell anyway. It's not trying to belittle it at any means. There was an incident that happened so we're on station. We
This is in Honduras.
No, this is Iraq.
In Iraq. Okay.
I got to Cobb Spiker outside of Tikrit, Iraq, which is a multinational division, MND North, which is everything from, if you look on a map, it's everything from Balad North all the way to the border. So you got Turkey above Iraq, and you got Syria to the west, and Iran, I think, to the east. Anyway, so we're in M&D North, covering 3 different locations with our aircraft from my company. So we're covering the entire northern half of Iraq at this point in time. I was stationed out of Spiker, which is kind of the main the headquarters company is stationed there with from my company. So we have 4 aircraft there, and so on and so forth, spaced out throughout the locations. And
you're flying a Black Hawk at this time?
Yes, Black Hawk medevac missions is primarily, and according to everybody kind of knows what medevac is, but
just go over it real quick.
It's the aircraft with the big red cross on it.
Yeah.
We evacuate wounded. That's our primary mission. According to the Geneva Convention of the Rules of War, medevac aircraft are non-combatants. But in theater, that red cross becomes a big red target.
Sure.
Because we're a soft target, if you will.
Yeah.
We're the guys that don't have guns hanging off the aircraft.
Right.
And that kind of stuff. So when they see a medevac aircraft, they know that if they can shoot us down, everybody's going to react. And if they want to set up like a complex attack kind of thing or an ambush type of thing, everybody's like the Black Hawk Down situation.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So if they can get us, we're the easiest ones to shoot down because we don't have the guns to defend ourselves.
My God.
So, I mean, we still have small arms.
Sure.
Individual protection.
But I'm just thinking like you said, it's like a big target on the side. Like,
right.
You're literally like, they're like, where's that one medevac helicopter? Right. Can we get them?
So getting back to the Iraq here, the IEDs are a big problem at this point in time in 2005 and on up pretty much up until the end of the war, and essentially. So what they would do is set up a complex attack is what it's called, what it's referred to commonly, tactics wise. So they set up an IED, roadside IED, which blows up a Humvee or whatever, a convoy. Mm-hmm. That convoy gets blown up. Then a medevac comes in to respond to the injured soldiers. And now they try to take out the aircraft. Right. And then after that, and then it slowly compounds, every time something new comes in, they try to take it out. But they hold back after that initial incident. They wait.
They're kind of fishing.
Right. Yeah. Right. They're throwing that bait out there. Yeah. So that's how that complex attack and ambushes kind of work in that respect at that time. So we had to be kind of careful. We had gunship cover most of the time. Sometimes not. But one of my missions, at that point in time, we're dealing with a lot of local national forces too. So Iraqi police, Iraqi army. At that time in the war, we were evacuating everybody who needed it. So Iraqi soldiers, civilians, Iraqi police, they have checkpoints throughout the country that get bombed every day or get shot up or whatever, that from the insurgents, the ISIS or Al Qaeda in Iraq and that kind of stuff. So we're getting missions all the time. We're getting every day, flying multiple missions. Typically it's foreign nationals, it's the Iraqi police, Iraqi army, like I said, civilians, unfortunately. A lot of roadside bombs, a lot of market bombs, things in the big, shopping districts and stuff like that. So they're blowing up everything, it seemed like. And we're responding. Well, this one night, getting back to the mission that was impactful, was the first night that me specifically was reacting to a U.S. crew. Mm-hmm. I think it was a convoy. I'm pretty sure it was take off, land, get the patients on board, and we take them to the casualty hospital, the CASH, and typically it's, everybody's talking about what's going on in the back. And this one was pretty quiet. So I knew it was kind of serious, because the medic is working on the patients in the back and we're trying to fly as fast as we can to get the patient through back to the cache or back to treatment, higher level treatment within that golden hour.
Right.
And, later on after, we dropped the patient off and then all that kind of stuff. And I still, that flashback, if you will, is they have what they call rickshaws, and they're the litter carriers. Or you got the litters, which are foldable, canvas with 2 bars, the traditional litter type of thing. And they take that off the aircraft and they put it on what's called a rickshaw. And it's basically like 2 big wheels and then a rack on top.
Right.
But you have to have people, and then you set the litter on it, but you still have to, because it's on a one set of wheels, it'll teeter on the other side.
Right. So you still have to hold it.
Still have to have people on both sides. Well, you had 2 people on each side rolling it away in front of my aircraft at the cache pad, the landing spot for the hospital, and I could see them doing chest on somebody on top doing chest as they're rolling him in. So I knew that he had expired at that point and whatnot. And then we got confirmation once we got back to base. Sometimes they'll send us statuses on the patients we drop off, just like modern day ambulance drivers, responding at a fire department. They want to know what happened to their patients. So we found out that, yes, he did not make it. And that was the first U.S. casualty for me that I didn't save, I guess, if you will.
Yeah.
That I knew.
First time you lost somebody.
First time I'd lost him. Right. And that one got me into a funk for a little while. Following that mission, and we don't get a break. It's not like we can say, hey, I want to take the next shift off because I'm, kind of messed up. I don't want to,
right.
Let me collect my thoughts and get myself in the right mindset. You're in combat. You can't do that.
Yeah.
So the next rotation, I'm back on the schedule again, and we're responding to missions just like everything else. And we find out about what happened. This mission, next mission was what's called a fratricide mission, or fratricide event, which is basically a friendly forces engagement. So U.S. forces against U.S. forces. So what happened was the main highway, MND North, Highway 1 or whatever it's called. Basically, one main highway runs the entire length of Iraq. And then that main highway is where everything gets transported to our bases, to the country, everything. And that's the main road that they set up IEDs on.
Sure.
So we find out that there was a checkpoint. A U.S. convoy was approaching that checkpoint. Something happened. There was a miscommunication, and the checkpoint opened up on the convoy.
They thought it was were somebody bad or whatever.
Something was amiss, and they ended up shooting our own guys. And I was responding to it. Thankfully, the casualty wasn't, I don't want to say severe. I think the guy ultimately lost his leg about it, but
he didn't die.
He did not die.
Yeah.
So, but and this is right in the middle of the night. This is like 1 a.m, pitch black outside. We're flying under night vision goggles and landing to a open desert area where we're picking up the casualty, and as I'm taking, a lot of times our missions get assigned based on a 9-line is what it's called. It's basically 9 lines of information. We only need 5 of those lines to actually launch on a mission, but typically they're called a 9-line. When you have it's like the script for that 911 call to call for help.
Okay.
So on the 9-line, typically they put a frequency for the ground element that's there so that we can try to coordinate with them, say, hey, is there any situational awareness that we need to be aware of? We're still in enemy contact, whatever's going on the landing pad or on the roadside or wherever it is, Is there any threats going on out there that we as a helicopter need to be aware of? Well, on the 9-line, typically you don't, at least at this point in time, typically the guys on the ground have enough going on.
Right.
So they wouldn't usually answer us. We try to, call them and say, hey, this is us. We're coming into land. We'll set up so that you can bring them in our right door or whatever, trying to coordinate for the patient transfer from the ground for their medics to our medics and whatnot. Well, this time they actually called me. They replied and says, yeah, we're here, blah, 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 and get the patient on board. And as I'm picking up to take off, he's like, hey, medevac, we appreciate it so much. And it was that gratitude that I could hear from the guys on the ground, because it almost, in my mind, obviously I have no way of confirming anything, but in my mind, it was like, it felt to me like it was the unit that opened fire on the other unit that I was talking to, because they were like, thank you so much for helping out in the situation that, so, I mean, it's the fog of war. Things
Sure.
happen, but that kind of got me out of my funk from losing that previous casualty, that patient from the previous mission.
Because you realize that there's just gonna be a bunch of these moments. There's like you're in the middle of a war.
Right. It's these little moments that make the entire year 18 months or 15 months impactful of ultimate. When I look back, I don't think about the day to day. I think about those individual little moments.
Right.
And that's you were alluding to previously that you were talking about what it's like to fly in a combat, and when we arrive in theater, we start in Kuwait, a couple of bases in Kuwait that we do, excuse me, a little bit of train up, dust landing qualifications, a few other things, to get familiar with the environment and that kind of stuff. And we're also doing maintenance on aircraft after shipping them overseas and that kind of stuff. Finally, we cross the berm is what we call it. Cross the berm between Kuwait and Iraq. And now you're actually in a combat zone. Once you cross that berm, now you have no idea. First time flying in combat, you've seen plenty of movies about, what to expect. And obviously this is open desert. So the only we've got the history of like Gulf War I to think about,
right.
But that was an initial invasion and then it was out. That was it. It was 100-hour, I think it was 100-hour war is essentially what Gulf War I was. Now there was Southern Watch and all that kind of stuff. But we never invaded into Kuwait or into Iraq. We just invaded, we freed Kuwait from the Iraqis.
Right.
And then we hit Iraqi forces as they were retreating on the highway of death, the highway 1 type of thing. But we didn't go into Iraq.
Right.
Take out Saddam and that kind of stuff at that point in time. So now this is the first time me crossing from Kuwait into Iraq. And this is the first time I ever realized what scorched earth meant. You've heard that phrase before,
Sure.
I'll go scorched earth on you, that kind of stuff. And we're in the desert. You think of the desert, you think of like the Sahara or the Mojave or whatever, and a lot of it's like that. I mean, it's not like the pristine dunes or anything like that. It's kind of scrub like West Texas kind of. But there were still remnants of Gulf War I. We still saw tanks that were blown out. We still saw, these little cutouts of the earth, basically making mounds where were little tank spots or little artillery spots and stuff like that. The oil fields that were set on fire during Gulf War I, the earth all around it was black. The desert was actually burned,
Wow.
Scorched earth. That's the first time I'd ever understood what it actually meant. That's what scorched earth actually means. You don't think like the desert could be black and burned to soot,
right?
But that's actually what it was until you see a car track going through it and it turns up the brown in the black, and you can see that it is actually still desert underneath. Let's see if there's anything else that. First mission, medevac call, obviously, you get that apprehensiveness, that I want to say that tingly feeling inside of you,
the nervousness,
and
butterflies.
Yeah.
To say,
it's just like anything else, if you've performed in front of an audience or if you've played a big game in front of a stadium, I suppose, or anything like that, any type of situation where, you're on. You have to be on. Right. You have to be on, and there's legitimate threat. Now, some people don't have that. Some people may have never experienced that legitimate threat. But you kind of, once you get past that, it kind of becomes. It just goes into the back of your mind, and you're so focused on what you're actually doing, so you don't really think about the fear or anything like that. The only times I was kind of nervous was actually because of weather.
No, but sure.
Because medevac, typically you have to at least try. You have to launch. You have to try to launch for the most part if you get approval. There's a risk factor association with every mission.
Mm-hmm.
Typically it's pre-approved. If these criteria are met, you're automatically approved. Go ahead and launch. But if something changes, like weather, weather comes down. There's the Shamal, which is the big crazy dust storms that you've seen on videos or haboobs or whatever they want to call them. Arizona gets hit by them sometimes. Have you ever seen that? Yeah. But these come in just all of a sudden, and we've gotten missions during either right before or right after. Like I remember flying and the wall of sand, all the way up into the sky, that as far as you can see is right there. And I remember flying, trying to get away from it, at
That's
times.
crazy.
So it's just, little things like that is what made me nervous more so.
Yeah.
There's only been a couple of times that I can think of off the top of my head where I remember seeing like tracer fire. If you ever remember seeing like the Gulf War I images of all the, those little lighted dots that go across the sky.
Right.
Well, every one you see that's lit, there's 3 more that aren't lit.
Oh, wow.
That you don't see.
Yeah.
Typically, it's a 1 to 4 mixture. So I've seen tracer fire, of course, being on Iraq a couple of times, but nothing that typically they're shooting at a sound.
Yeah.
Because we're flying all blacked out.
Yeah.
We're under night vision with night vision IR and all that kind of stuff. We can see each other, but people on the ground typically can't see. Well, now they can
right.
after Afghanistan. But yeah, so we owned the night. That was the big thing, that was how we fought. But I never really felt threatened because they're shooting at the sound. Well, by the time they hear the sound, they're already past it. Yeah. And that's a good thing.
Yeah,
I'm not trying to give away any tactics, but it's pretty easy to figure out, anyway. But yeah, so the once you get past that, and then it kind of becomes routine. Yeah. You get a lot of missions. At that time, we got a lot of missions. I flew a lot during that 15 months, that 15 months in time frame.
Hey, everybody. You can find this and a lot of other cool swag on AMGP Store.
Well, okay, you tell me officially kind of like what you do for a living now.
So obviously, I am retired, so I get my pension from the military.
Yeah, but
my side hustle, if you want to call it that.
You have gotten the benefit of being able to do something that you really like and love.
Yes,
and via the military. So that's fair.
So coming off after retiring, kind of got some back issues after flying helicopters. For
we're going to discuss those in a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
So can't really pursue a career in flying. So I ended up going to back to school. Got a degree in precision machining, which was something that interested me.
That's cool.
Yeah. So being a maintenance test pilot in the military, working on mechanical things, that kind of thing. So now I'm actually learned how to manufacture mechanical things. So I learned how to do, machining, mill, lathe, manual, and CNC. So if you look up any videos about CNC machining, it's, the big cutting head comes down to a big hunk of metal, in raw form, big piece of aluminum or steel, and it just starts cutting out pieces of it. And that's what I learned to do. And I just happen to apply that to the firearms industry currently because that's something that I'm passionate about.
So, okay. I don't know. I want to make sure I understand this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, you're a machinist. And then you decided to make guns with your skills.
I'm not necessarily making guns per se. I am working on guns.
Okay, so
modifying or altering them back to previous state, and that requires special licensing, which I am licensed for.
Yeah,
so.
we definitely I definitely want to put this out there that like everything we're talking about right now, he's 1,000% legal. Like he's allowed to do all these things. Yes. Don't at and be like about whatever. Like so, like anything that we talk, he's totally like that's. I mean, yeah.
So I have a full.
Would it be braggadocious to say you're fairly an expert at kind of this kind of thing? Would that be fair? I mean, and
experts a big term. So
how long have you been doing this? Like how long have you been doing machining?
I've been passionate, or machining specifically. I started learning it probably from a buddy of mine who I'll call a mentor. He was previously an engineer and a machinist. Learning about, and throughout his career, he's in his 70s now, late 60s. Sorry. Sorry, Keith. Anyway.
Keith, you say his name's Keith?
Keith, yeah.
What's up, Keith?
So kind of got me involved in the process of analyzing, a piece of technology or a piece of metal or whatever we were looking at and trying to figure out, okay, how did they make this? And that's kind of been, something that interested me. Being interested in the Second Amendment or in firearms specifically, and then being passionate about it. I just applied it to that. So a lot of people talk about gunsmithing and that kind of stuff. This is a step further than that. It's in the manufacturing process of it a little bit, making silencers, which in Texas is kind of a new thing that we just got approval for, but I technically can't play in that pool because I'm a federally licensed manufacturer. So I'm a FFL 02 and 07, FFL 07, 02 SOT, which is special occupancy tax, which allows me to work on machine guns, silencers, short barrel rifles, short barrel shotguns, and things like that.
So you said how long you've been doing this?
I've been doing it since I retired, since starting the company.
Okay.
So, 2016.
And so what is the company what just really quickly, what's the company and what's the service you provide?
Okay. The company's called J&T Precision, and we provide pretty much all manner of services for rifle building. I've built a couple of precision rifles. That was a main focus of my, enthusiastic ability of.
And what's a precision rifle?
Like long range precision.
Okay.
So bolt action rifles that were designed to shoot, 1,000 yards. And
Like
so
what was that movie with Bradley Cooper? Shooter?
No. American Sniper.
Yeah. Is that the kind?
Similar. Obviously, that's a military application. For me, it involved more around precision rifle series, PRS competitions. Okay. Which is like a
they're shooting at long ranges and stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay. But as a game, it's obviously they're not.
Yeah. Not like Hunger Games or anything like that.
Right.
So hey, really quickly, do you use a different type of metal for that barrel, or is it basically kind of the standard?
So the barrels are, for the most part, stainless. We order those from a vendor, but we cut the chamber, which is the most important part. You're cutting the chamber, head spacing it, assembling it with the receiver, making sure that it's in line or brain farting.
Like the pin hits where it's supposed to, and it does all the things.
Well, it's aligned concentricity wise.
Okay.
So the center line of the bore of the receiver and the barrel, of the receiver and the bolt. Mm-hmm. Is all center line correct with the barrel. Right. So that creates, it's not canted slightly.
Yeah, because it creates space and that messes it up, right?
Right. It any type of flex or any type of misalignment in the process of manufacturing. Like you buy a rifle off the shelf from a commercial vendor, Remington, whatever company you want to talk about, those are mass produced. Yes, there is a tolerance to those, but we just have a higher level of tolerance to make sure that everything is aligned correctly.
Okay. So. Just because they're doing competition shooting and stuff like that. Right? Yeah. And so, and then any other thing else you do with that?
Specific to the company?
Yeah.
We'll work on just about everything, capability wise, as long as we have the ability to do it. Making silencers.
Muskets.
We could work on them, sir, but those aren't considered firearms, actually.
So what is a musket considered?
It's considered a muzzle loader. Okay. So it's not classified by the Gun Control Act, is what it's called, and that's what the NFA, the ATF designates as anything under the Gun Control Act. There's a year associated. I did not late
know
1800s, 1885 or 18.
So if your gun is older than
that part out, I should know that.
No. Wait, look, you can't know all the facts all the time.
Right.
So we'll say like 1885. Everything before that is considered
a non-firearm. So you can actually get it mailed right to your house. Yeah, you can order a cannon. Currently you keep hearing our president say you couldn't order a cannon back when the Second Amendment was written. Absolutely, you could. You could order it now, and you'd be legal to have it. Because it's considered a muzzle loader.
Wow, that's crazy.
So I don't know why he keeps saying that.
Well, why is he even bringing up cannons anyway?
Right. Yeah, it makes no sense. Obviously, he keeps rambling on about you need an F-15 and nuclear weapons to present a threat to the government. Whereas if you think about the conflicts that we've been in the last decade in Afghanistan and Iraq, those are peasants with rifles.
Yeah.
Those are not high-powered military might, current threats in the world that essentially defeated, I'm not trying to say defeated us as a country, but they essentially pushed us to to lose our will to fight in certain aspects.
Right.
You know what I mean? Just like when we left Vietnam, essentially the U.S. did not have the will to fight anymore. It became a social media war.
Sure.
Or media war.
A media war time. Back then, what that would be, right?
As opposed to now, which is actually a social media war,
right?
But kind of going back to, I don't know if you want to lead into why I'm passionate about it.
Well, I was going to ask you, like, were you, I don't want to say, like, it sounds so cheap to say, like, were you into guns? Were you interested in firearms before you joined the military?
Yes. Father introduced me to firearms.
Okay.
Growing up.
So your dad had firearms.
Yes.
Was that because of his military training, or he just why did he?
Looking back, I think so now. He enjoyed them because he talks about weapons that he actually used back then. But growing up, like I said, I never knew he was
Right.
even in the military, but
Right.
I knew he enjoyed going out and shooting firearms and stuff like that. So that kind of translated to me. I've had a whole lot more appreciation to it after the military service, of course,
Sure.
or during the military service, essentially, especially the Army. Obviously, the Navy didn't really use firearms
Yeah.
as an individual very much.
Sure.
But we did a little bit of training, and that was it. But the Army, absolutely, we use firearms.
Quick question. Did your dad, did he teach you to respect guns and weapons? Like, was that something that he taught you? Like, was that something that was important to him? Or did you learn that like in the military? Or where, like, because I'm going to go on a limb and say, based on your job and everything you're talking about, that you have a like mad respect
Yes.
for firearms and safety and all
Absolutely,
that kind of
yeah.
stuff, right? Like, because you have to. It's
Absolutely,
you need,
yeah.
like, I mean, it's not.
It's a dangerous instrument.
I know. Hey, I know in Texas you can ride a motorcycle without a helmet, but you shouldn't do it. I'm just going
Right.
to tell you, right?
Sure.
So, like, you know,
Yeah.
so like it's important. So, anyway, so where did you get that kind of idea of like being like that, all that importance of that kind of stuff?
I hate to admit that I probably didn't get it from my dad.
But I mean, but your dad wasn't dangerous.
No, by no means. He taught me to respect it, but formal training, obviously, through the military, and
Yeah,
then
it's totally different.
in other training that
Yeah.
I've been exposed to a level of competency that well exceeds what my dad growing up knew.
Yeah.
You know what
But
I mean?
like,
So
but from the jump, he like that. I mean, my dad was
he kind of planted the seed.
Yeah,
And
like
that was pretty much.
my dad
you
was
know.
a deer hunter,
Sure.
right?
Okay.
So, just from the very jump, it was like, hey, don't point this at anybody,
Absolutely, yeah.
right? Make sure the safety's on, like just basic kind of stuff that just
Basic firearms rules of safety.
you know what I mean.
Fundamentals.
So that you're respecting the weapon that you're holding in your hand,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
So, anyways, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay.
So, the military really nails it down, but then like, you know, I one of the questions that I ask is before you come in is like, you know, something you're passionate about, and so, you said you were very passionate about the Second Amendment,
Yes.
and
okay.
I'm assuming this is all kind of linked together. So I just wanted
Somewhat, yeah. The way I think about it is a little bit different. You know, I'm of the opinion, it's my opinion, so that the Second Amendment guarantees the First. And the way our country was created, you know, back in 1776 during the founding, you know, the original revolution of you know, the way this country was incepted, people have lost kind of the responsibility of understanding what that foundation is about anymore. And I don't know if it seems intentional, you know, just being someone who's viewing what's going on in the country at this time, because kids aren't taught civics like we used to. Most people in society today can't tell you what the three branches of government are in this country anymore. You know, you think about that old, you know, How a Bill Becomes a Law, Saturday,
Yeah.
you know, the Saturday morning special cartoon or whatever it was, you know.
Schoolhouse Rock.
Schoolhouse Rock, right? Yeah.
Boom.
So, but
Also referencing how old we are.
right. But, you know, especially coming from a country that, you know, my parents had to flee from, and I, not knowingly at the time, of course, because I was only 6 months old at the time, we had to flee conflict.
Did they talk to you about that at all when you got a little bit older?
Definitely older. I didn't appreciate it at all growing up, because I was
Like
a
you're just like,
spoiled,
whatever.
spoiled American kid now, you know, growing up in Midwest Ohio, you know, Northeast Ohio in the Midwest, considered part of the Midwest. So, you know, growing up with all the people at school that have everything,
Right.
you know what I mean? They didn't grow up in hardship or not knowing where their next meal is and that kind of stuff.
Or they didn't move with 2 bags.
Or that,
You know what I mean? Yeah.
They didn't have the type of, you know, perspective that my parents did. Now, I didn't appreciate it growing up, of course, but now I definitely appreciate it.
So I would say my parents are very similar,
Okay.
right? And I would say very similar. I was spoiled and I
Right,
didn't appreciate it, but I would argue that like even though you didn't appreciate it, you were taking it in, you were absorbing it
Absolutely. Yeah.
in, you know, and like even though on the surface it appeared that we were spoiled brats,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Like it stuck, like it really stuck that kind of, you know, like grind nose, work hard kind of attitude. Would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when like I kind of outlined earlier, when my school friends were out on the weekends, you know, playing sports or running out and running around the woods or whatever they were doing, I was at the restaurant helping out the family business.
Right.
So I wasn't able to, you know, embrace
What's the best lesson you learned from that as like a young kid, adult? Like what was the one thing you took away from that experience of working for your parents in that business that just kind of really, I don't know, set you like it's just something that you kind of like. It's part of your foundation of who you are.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's definitely a work foundation. Knowing to sacrifice now to sacrifice what you need to accomplish your goals, staying focused on the end goal and that type of stuff, but also not, you kind of have to, it's kind of a double-edged sword or a fine line, if you will, because you don't want to sacrifice everything in life, throughout the time currently now to be so
enjoy
focused.
some of it
Right,
along the way.
You have to enjoy some of it. So you can't, so that's a big part of it. What else? I didn't know how.
Well, I was just we were talking about kind of like your parents, like the base of kind of how you grew up,
Sure,
and how lucky you were, and so
yes.
then
Okay.
So why the Second Amendment protects the First?
Sure.
Right. So, anyways,
well, the big thing is an appreciation of being a citizen,
right,
of this country,
right.
Looking back, and it really, when my parents came down for my retirement ceremony from the military, and there's a little bit of a to do, big ceremony in front of with a podium, and I got some plaques and that kind of stuff.
Fancy.
Not so much a gold watch or anything like that what you used to get, but you have to present, you're up there, you're talking about, your career and things that are impactful. You're retiring. So this is what your message is going
It's your
out.
NFL Hall of Fame speech.
Yeah. Kind of like that. Yeah. And I didn't even think about it until my dad mentioned it. It's like, hey, make sure you put something about appreciating this country into your speech, because you came from very humble beginnings as a 6-month-old, foreigner who came and provided, or this country provided us with a upbringing and a level of financial stability and stability in general in life that a lot of foreigners don't get. You better appreciate that. And as a citizen, I was naturalized, so I didn't have to go through all the exams and all that, because I was only 6 months old when I came to the country, or my parents brought me to the country rather. And then I thought about that, thinking back to, actually originally signing the dotted line when I was 17, not knowing anything really, seeing way too many movies, Top Gun and so on and so forth, having this passion about, oh, that looks cool, I want to try that, to now at the end of my career in the military, at least at that time in 2016, I'm like, okay, so I've given majority of my adult life to this country. Most people, I don't mean to sound condescending about, this is what I sacrificed for, you don't have to thank me for my service kind of stuff. That's not the point of the point I'm making. But most people don't have that depth of willingness to provide something in service to something greater. And I don't want to say, it's just complacency. No, not complacency. It's a level of comfort that is created in an environment, especially in the modern age.
But you created that comfort for me.
Sure, and I appreciate you telling me that.
I appreciate you. We talked about this, like we took a break earlier. We talked about this that like I can't even imagine doing what you've done, because that's just not me.
Yeah,
and I feel very grateful for people that can do that stuff.
Yeah.
Because it makes where I can do this stuff. Because this is what I do.
Sure.
I sit in my garage.
And a very interesting segue of the second protecting the first. If you will.
Yeah. Go ahead. Anyways, go ahead. Yeah.
So, especially right now in the current environment that we're in, with the open borders on Texas and across the country right now, and all this kind of citizenship as a U.S. citizen, it feels like Americans don't appreciate it anymore. In general, they're blind to the fact that they're U.S. citizens. This is like a winning lottery number. You know what I mean?
Like, you see how you feel about this statement.
Okay.
When you go to China, what kind of people are there? Chinese people.
Yeah, sure.
When you go to Vietnam, there's Vietnam people. Anywhere else you go, except for the United States, there's those people there for the most part, right? Mm-hmm. But here, it's like everybody, and we just let everybody in. We don't even we don't even care, and it's become so just not a big deal that the people that are here don't appreciate it. Is that kind of?
Somewhat.
Because look, if I want to go live in China, they ain't gonna let me live there.
No, absolutely not.
If I want to go live anywhere else, you have to get a visa. Like it's a whole process.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so if we're in, and by the way, if you don't know, we're in the greatest place ever. You might view it as sucks, but go somewhere else.
Yeah. Most people haven't been outside of the country. So they have no perspective of how good it is here.
Well, they don't they don't listen to people like you. they like really like talk to somebody that has some perspective of shit.
Sure.
Man, because
Absolutely.
because when you really get a perspective of how wonderful your life is and how easy it is when some people are working really hard to make it that way, I feel like it should change how you view things.
Yeah. And that's kind of disappointing in my mind. That's all. I think about what people have.
I mean, I would be, it would be hard not to be upset to know that, like, your parents had to work to become citizens here.
Yes.
You said you were naturalized, but I'm assuming, like, if it had been different, you would have done the exact same thing. If you had to become a citizen in the same way, you would have done it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you serve in the military, and it's like everything you've done is like the American dream, not the American dream, but it's capable in America.
Yes,
and not really anybody anywhere else.
I mean, let me push back a little bit because at the time of joining the Navy, spending the 6 years enlisted, and then getting out, working in the civilian sector for 4 or 5 years, and then joining back up again, not realizing that it was going to be for 9/11, and then serving the rest of my time in the service, ultimately retiring after 20 years total. I never saw it as, I have to do this as part of my
I didn't mean to mean it that way.
No. I want to make sure that I emphasize that, it's not like I enjoyed the job I was performing and doing because I got enjoyment out of it. So it's not just for the appreciating the country so much that I have to so to speak, put myself out there and sacrifice all of my time and, all that kind of stuff. That's not what it's about. It's just about appreciating it at this point in time in my perspective in my life and looking back and then seeing the typical teenager or young adult today and seeing the difference in perspective. It might be because of just, the movies I watched growing up or all that kind of stuff, watching John Wayne and, that kind of thing growing up, or Clint Eastwood growing up and that kind of thing, all those cowboy action type movies and war movies and whatnot. But that's typically what I think of how boys live.
Right.
But nowadays it's all video games and, whatever else on social media, I suppose. So it's a different perspective in that, but you can't forget about what is the foundation and what is the purpose, with the foundations of the country is, the pursuit of happiness. Sure. But we're also talking about, we're trying to create a better nation. And people have forgotten that, I think, or they may feel like this is going to create a better, whatever their opinion will create a better nation and all. But you can't do that by disregarding all the ugly things that happened in our history. You have to learn from it. And if you don't ever learn from it, or you're denying those things from being taught, then how do you know not to do it again? We're very...
Well, especially from your perspective, because you've lived through some of those things.
Sure.
Living through, going through a war, that really kind of just like digs you in on like, kind of like how important all this stuff really is and like how lucky we are. And it emphasizes that, I would say at some level, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
But the citizenship part of it is, I make it sound like it was easy, growing up in a different country. And when I grew up younger as a kid, I honestly, don't have too much recollection of it, but, growing up with an accent or something that, being new to a country. And then, to where I am now, the points of certain... I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
Well, I was going to ask you, are you close to your dad?
Yeah.
Were y'all always close?
No.
Yeah. But
I've definitely appreciated it more now.
No, but I think that is a very natural evolution of a good father.
Yeah. I
think,
agree. Absolutely.
I think, you were kind of talking about influence stuff a while ago. it appears to me your dad had a great influence on you.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know what I mean? About all your values and where it comes from and how valuable this stuff
Sure.
and stuff like that. And so I don't know, I was thinking about like my parents as well.
Mm-hmm.
And they were hard on me not hard on me, but they were very similar. They probably had very similar
They
thoughts.
provided a level of discipline.
Yeah. And I think that I didn't always like my parents. You know what I mean? We didn't always get along. I defied them a lot, but I think, I don't know, y'all can tell me, parents, if you ask them now, even though everything didn't go quite the way they wanted to, I think they feel pretty good about how they raised me and setting those values. And it all started with them.
Absolutely.
Like, I think about that with my daughter a lot. Matter
of fact, I just recently thanked my dad.
Did you?
I actually, we were on the phone just randomly talking about something. I don't remember what. And I was like, you know what? Looking at the way the country is right now, I want to make sure I let you know that thank you for being hard on,
the values
I
he
probably
provided.
said thank you for kicking my ass when I was young is what I actually said to him. But, the point was, thank you for giving me a certain amount of discipline and knowing where the limits are and not being someone who's put me in front of the TV all day, or now would be, putting a tablet in front of the kid,
Sure.
As a tablet babysitter or whatever you want to call it nowadays, being influenced by things online or everything else. He was strict. If all he had to do was look. Give me that glare, and I knew I was in for it, especially in public.
Hey, my dad would do this thing where like he had this like belt, and I mean he must have sweated in this thing like so much. I mean the belt, which it could just stand up by itself. It could just it was like a sword almost, and he would bend it over and just bring it into the room. And if he just showed up with that belt, you knew it was over. You know what I mean? And I thought about this as a parent. And I have a little girl, so.
Yep.
It worked. It worked on me.
Mm-hmm.
My brother, Brandon, it didn't necessarily work on him,
Right.
and I think every kid's kind of different, but I guess, that's at that time and what my parents are doing, that's a tough love they want to give me. I've never thought about it like that they beat me or anything like that. It was just it was the time, but also maybe I needed my butt whooped a little bit,
And coming from I want to say it's a cliche Asian, family, I would consider, I jokingly call myself the black sheep of the family.
Why is that?
Because my older sister is a pharmacist, medical, doctor of pharmacy. My younger sister is a nurse, 9 years separation between us. And so they're all in the medical field. The best I could do is become an Army helicopter pilot who flew medevac. That's about the closest the medical field that I could get. But it was, teasing.
Your job's way cooler.
Well, I appreciate that. But yeah.
So, usually how I like to wrap this thing up is just kind of ask people what they do to kind of take care of themselves. And especially we touched it a little bit, just kind of all the political things that are going on and all the frustrations around the way people can be and act and stuff like that, and again, I mean, this is only the second time for us to kind of sit down and talk.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I feel like we've had a really great conversation. And so,
absolutely.
I always say that a lot of people I meet are totally normal. I don't know where these crazy people are that do all this extreme stuff. But that can be very frustrating. So how do you take care of your, what are the things that you do to take care of yourself to manage all these emotions at this kind of vulnerable time of our country?
Okay. Well, I mean, obviously you have to disconnect.
Yeah.
Disconnect from your devices and go do something you're passionate about. For me, I enjoy going out on, I don't know if it sounds cliche from what we've discussed at this point, but getting out on the range and sending rounds down range further range than I know I'm capable of, and seeing how much I can push that limit. Or every now and then I still get the opportunity to fly, which is still a passion of mine. I enjoy it. I did it as a career, but now I can do it without the Army telling me that, taking the fun out of everything.
Right.
But my friend of mine owns a company that up the street in Temple, Texas. It's called Last Shadow, where they do...
Shout out to Last Shadow.
Yeah. Where they do aerial hog hunting for hog control here in Texas, which is a huge problem.
Yes. Yeah, don't add us.
Try not to be controversial about it. But
you're
every
fine.
Now and then I get the opportunity to go up and wiggle sticks and fly with my buddy that flies for them.
Is that fun?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's like a friend of mine who's since passed on, who passed away, used to call it like going up and it's like being up on a magic carpet. That's how he referred to it.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. So, because the doors are open and you're buckled in, but you're in the breeze. You know what I mean? And you just have a certain amount of freedom where you can fly in airplanes is great. Cool. We talked about Top Gun and being a fighter pilot and all that kind of stuff. But a helicopter allows you to stop and look around and enjoy the view. And that's one thing that I really love about flying helicopters specifically, because you can creep up somewhere and just kind of
hang out, right?
Look at this rock face. It's like, man, look at all those colors in that rock face, or whatever, depending on where you are and the environments you're flying in, so
it's kind of like, it's like a giant drone of sorts. Right, like you know what I mean.
Except
like
you're in it now.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like you're in it. Yeah, like you know what I mean.
Right,
like where you can kind of just stop and hover and just kind of like hang out and stuff like that.
Yeah. So that helps me regulate my,
Oh, by the way, if you like dealt in firearms and like didn't shoot a gun, that would be like a tattoo artist with like no tattoos. You know what I mean? Like, I would expect you to be one of the things that you like to do.
Absolutely.
So, can you let me know if you can like? Do you have a favorite gun you like to take to the range? Is there one that you really like to shoot?
There's classics. Like there's a Thompson submachine gun, which is like a World War II.
Like the little
right. The gangster style was the drum. Yeah. So the Saving Private Ryan version was just the stick magazine.
See, I know nothing about guns. That's why you're gonna get all these dumb questions.
Right. No worries. So that's a classic one. That's a little piece of history. And I have an M1 Garand is just a classic. The ping. You hear that sound.
Yeah.
But ultimately, probably a precision rifle, just a plain old bolt action rifle that I built, and going out and shooting long range with it, and it's almost therapeutic because it's where science meets art, if you will.
Sure.
The science is the external ballistics of it. How fast the bullet's going. What gravity does to the bullet. So there's digital. There's apps now that you can calculate what your ballistic drop is going to be at given distances. Then you got to add the wind, and that's where the art comes in. It's like Jedi training.
Yeah.
You have to visualize what's going on with the tree lines and where that target is at compared to the flight of the bullet. If you're shooting down a canyon that has different directions of canyons coming into it, that's wind feeding into it like a river kind of. So you have to think about that, and that's where that's therapeutic to me, I suppose.
Well, in the same way, a lot of people do archery.
Absolutely,
and
it's just a different level of precision.
Yeah,
you free your mind, you clear your mind of all the distraction of modern day, and all that kind of stuff, and you just get out and being in nature and that kind of stuff.
You mentioned before you have a bad back.
Yes,
just really quickly, because I have a bad back too. So
sure.
On days when your back's bad, it's tough, right?
It's debilitating.
Yeah,
sure.
it's depressing, right?
Yeah,
it's a mental. For me, it's a lot of mental stuff. Like especially when my back hurts, right? So, what do you do on those days? What do you do on the days where you're just kind of like, how do you get through those days? Because I'm sure, my back is just is muscular. I'm sure yours is kind of probably really damaged.
It's a combination of things with surgeries and whatnot.
So, anyway, what do you do on those days when it's just really tough like that?
Well, I don't know if this is contradictory, but maybe at that point in time, if it's to the point where I need to distract myself from, discomfort or whatever, then I'll just throw on a podcast or something like that. And maybe that's feeding the beast of stressing myself out in other ways, but, depending on what I'm listening to, whether it be Joe Rogan or Tim Pool or, other political activist type people. But
well, depending on how bad it is, sometimes rest is all you can really do.
Absolutely.
Right?
But laying in bed or sitting on the couch, laying on the couch and just listening to podcasts where I don't have to open my eyes and I could just listen.
Right.
Or audiobooks are a huge one nowadays, also.
Do you have any book recommendations? You have
currently, I just, I just listened to Goggins,
okay,
who's a former Navy SEAL, who's a very motivated individual, and he's a monster.
What's the name of the book?
Man.
We can throw it in later.
Okay,
but
sorry, it's one that I just recently listened to. It's basically his autobiography,
right?
And talks about
you do audiobooks all the time?
For the most part nowadays, because I'm reading vision is starting to get depraved at this point.
Me too. I do all audiobooks. It's way easy. I take it in better.
But I can also do it while I'm doing other things too.
Yeah.
So it makes it convenient, and so
the technology's there.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Why not use it? I'm going to shame myself because I'm not actually reading it.
Right.
Yeah.
David Goggins is probably the big one that I read or listened to recently. That was a kind of a self-help motivational, put the world in perspective, because this guy had it hard.
Yeah.
And then he accomplished all kinds of amazing things and powering through certain elements. Like he's an ultra marathoner and all that stuff after being a Navy SEAL, after growing up in, the very hard childhood and all kinds of stuff. And then on the fiction side, I'll sometimes listen to multiple books at a time just to break things up.
Sure.
Because, it's like watching different episodes of TV you listen to a little bit of the story at a time kind of thing. And another one I listen to is Jack Carr. It's fiction, but it's kind of in the same. He does a lot of gear and stuff in his books. He's very tailored in military, I guess it'd be political thriller action type novels, fiction novels. He had Navy SEAL related type stuff also, just so happens. But and they just put out a Amazon miniseries about it. So I'll give him a shout out. Yeah. I appreciate, his books and whatnot. So so that's.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure like you're exercising like that. That's another another thing you do. Like, you have
to go out and hike with my German Shepherd, and I have a 3-year-old German Shepherd named Trigger, and we'll go off and go whether we go to the dog park, and I just do laps around it with his little doggy baby bag that I put on as a little bit of weight that I can carry, and I'll do laps around the dog park, or we'll go off and take a trip out to Arizona and go hiking out in the desert with
that's your disconnect,
friends.
Right? You were talking about disconnecting earlier. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's so important, and it's so easy. Like, I mean, people make it out to be really hard. It's really easy.
No, yeah.
There's nothing that important going on your phone, trust me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's very I heard recently, I was listening to a different podcast, and when he goes out to eat with his family, they'll stack all the cell phones in the corner of the table, and that's become like a tradition now, and other people see it and have started mimicking it and that kind of stuff, which is kind of cool. And that was Travis Haley's podcast. So
I've told this story before. My birthday last year, I made all the guys that were with me put their cell phones in the middle of the table.
Yeah.
Because I was that dude.
Right.
But like this is what I noticed. It made people stay engaged when they'd normally disengage by getting on their phone. Right. So like they're in the conversation, for whatever reason, the conversation gets boring.
Absolutely.
And so they get on their phone and now they're disengaged from the conversation.
It's become a crutch. It's become a crutch.
So if they stay in,
sure,
then they have input and they're more involved and the conversation's better.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
And you're more aware of what's going on around you.
Yeah.
Your surroundings. You're not oblivious to the world happening around you, positive or negative.
Right.
We talk about bad things happen nowadays, so you have to be prepared to react to certain things nowadays.
I mean, unfortunately, we are now living in a world where you, like, in a short way to say, like, you need to know where the exits are.
Absolutely.
Like, you need to just be aware of your surroundings. So don't be on your cell phone in the H-E-B grocery line.
Absolutely.
'Cause I don't like that.
Yeah.
So, did you have a good time, man?
Yeah, this was great. This is my first official podcast, I suppose.
Nice. Yeah. So how do you feel?
Well.
How do you feel? Feel good?
Yeah, pretty relaxed. I thought I might be a little nervous, but honestly,
I told you.
Yeah,
because we like I might have mentioned we met up once before for today. Just he wanted to like scope me out.
The courting process.
Yeah, he wanted to make sure that I wasn't like really weird, and so we met up and stuff like that. But I knew it would be great. I knew we'd just roll right back into our conversations. So whenever we get out of here, I'll make everybody give me a hug. So
I appreciate it.
I'm gonna force you into a hug. Oh.